Yud Tes Kislev is known as Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. I assume you've heard that term before. So you can go through, it's fine. So, in short, is there any... No, I can't really ask that, but I was going to say, is there anyone here who's not familiar with the story of Yud Tes Kislev? Because that's not going to be nice if there's someone who doesn't want to say that they don't know. The Alter Rebbe basically was in prison and came out, right? And it was prison in Russia. It wasn't like American prisons are bad. American prison is like paradise compared to what Russian prisons were like. And he was taken to prison in a way that implied that he wasn't ever going to come out and probably wasn't going to be there for very long either. V'hamevin yavin. Use your imagination to figure out what that means was expected to happen. In short, the Alter Rebbe came out, and interestingly, the prosecutor general actually, and we can see it today, the documents are available online, the actual original scanned images of the original documents that were used in the case. You can see that the prosecutor general recommended to the Tsar that the Alter Rebbe is a threat to the state and should be dealt with accordingly. And for some inexplicable reason, the Tsar signed off that he's not a threat to the state and he's free to go and to continue doing whatever he was doing as he sees fit. The Rebbe Rashab. So this was obvious. Just for context, while this story happened, the Chassidim fasted, while the Alter Rebbe was in prison, fasted every Monday and Thursday. Didn't eat fish or meat at all. On Shabbos, we're allowed to have one bite of fish and that's it. There were no new engagements. The people who were already engaged got married with just a minyan and with the minimal acceptable halachic level of celebration. It was very, very dire and very, very serious. Then the Alter Rebbe came out and it was a huge Yom Tov and people were somersaulting down the street and etc., etc. And it was celebrated every year. In Tofresh Samach Beis, the Rebbe Rashab was away from the yeshiva. The Rebbe Rashab traveled relatively often to, be involved in things that were important for the community, for the Yidden B'chlal, for the Chassidim. So in the year Tofresh Samach Beis, the Rebbe Rashab was away from the yeshiva, from Tom Chitzmim. He sent a letter away from his Talmidim. He sent a letter that was like his, consolation for Yud Tes Kislev and for not being able to farbring with them. And in the letter he says, Karav hadavar loymar, it is close to being able to say, which is basically a way of saying, kind of, Yud Tes Kislev is Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. Yud Tes Kislev is kind of Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. It's, for all intents and purposes, let's say Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. The Rebbe included that in Hayom Yom, but the Rebbe took out the words Karav Hadavar Loymar. The Rebbe said, it is Yom Tov, it is Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. So the Rebbe seems to be making a statement. It isn't like Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. He took those words out. It is Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. So in terms of what that means to us, okay, so what's Yud Tes Kislev about for us? We have to understand what Rosh Hashanah is. Now, Rosh Hashanah, have you ever heard someone, people don't generally say things along the lines of happy head of the year or happy annual cranium, right? You say happy new year. But it's not called Tchilas Hashanah, the beginning of the year. It's not called Shana Chadasha, New Year. It's called Rosh Hashanah, the head of a year. Now, if Torah calls it Rosh Hashanah, there's a reason, and it means that. And the Mitzvah Rebbe explains in significant detail why it's called the head of the year. And it talks about 3 ideas specifically. 3 things that Rosh Hashanah has, that Rosh Hashanah relative to the year has in common with the head relative to the body. Now, the head, first of all, is a source of life. The brain in the head is a source of life for the whole body, which is part of the reason that, Rahman al-Atzlan, brain injuries can be so devastating. Okay, I'm not even going to go there because we don't have time as much as I would like to. So, the brain is the source, the brain and the head that contains it is the source of life for the whole body. Every voluntary movement that happens in your body, and not just every voluntary movement, everything that happens in your body can be traced back to the brain. The brain controls everything that happens in the body. Whether it's directly through nerves, whether it's through hormonal systems in the body that trace their way back all the way to the brain, and the brain sort of sets those pathways of reactions of hormones and other sorts of messengers in the blood and gets them going. The brain controls everything that happens in the body. A third thing that the Rebbe Rashab points out is that the entire body exists in concentrated form inside the brain. The question is, what does that mean? What it means physically, biologically. Like, I assume everybody's seen some sort of picture of the brain. It looks like a bunch of sort of squiggly sections, and the brain's in two halves, two hemispheres. On the right side, I would say somewhere approximately here-ish, there's a little piece of brain, one of those little squiggly things, probably around about that big, is called the primary motor cortex. What that does, motor, movement, the primary motor cortex is a little bit of brain, little piece, that big-ish, that controls all the voluntary movements in your brain. When you move your finger, it comes from there. You move your other finger, it comes from there. You move your toe, you move your head, you move your arm. Now, when you move your finger like that, there are muscles here that are involved, and muscles here, and muscles here, and muscles here, and muscles here. Each of those muscles has its own individual dedicated cell inside the brain that sends a message. It's not like there's just a piece of brain that controls everything. That little piece of brain, the primary motor cortex, has a different neuron to control every single voluntary muscle movement in your body. Every muscle in your body that you use to make a movement, whatever muscle or movement it might be, has its own dedicated cell in that primary motor cortex. If there was just one thing that controlled everything, every time you tried to do something, your whole body would start moving. But it doesn't, right? Every part of your body has its own dedicated cell. This neuron fires and sends a message to make that muscle contract, and this one makes this muscle contract, or that muscle contract, and that muscle contract. So every single part of the body, and you have one primary motor cortex on the right side that controls movement, voluntary movement on the left side of the body. One primary motor cortex on the left side of the brain that controls voluntary movement in the right side of the body. Every single part of your body has its own individual, super concentrated representation in the brain. If you think about it, if the whole body is in there, it's extremely concentrated. Then there's the somatosensory cortex, which is right next to it, which is a similar kind of thing, but it's the opposite direction. So what that means is sensation. It stores it processes incoming information. When you feel something with the tip of your right index finger, that there's a specific dedicated neuron in your somatosensory cortex which receives that message from that nerve ending and understands, oh, something touched me right specifically in that spot. And every single different part of your body that can feel something, that can smell something, it can feel touch, it can feel heat. Every message that comes in from your body, from any part of your body, has its own dedicated part of the brain, its own dedicated neuron, brain cell, that processes and receives that information. Receives and processes would be a more correct order. So every part of your body is represented in the motor cortices, which is plural of cortex, one on each side. Every part of your body is represented in the somatosensory cortices, etc. And those are just two total, those two on each side is total, probably including both sides, about that much and that thin, deep of your brain. So your whole body is represented twice in that much of your brain. Only that deep, very thin layer. So that's the third thing. So we have three things about the body and the head. The brain is the source of life for the body, which is why Rahman al-Islam, if a part of the body person gets nerve damage, let's say, gets paralysis in part of the body because the nerve supplying that part of the body gets cut off, what happens is it doesn't just stop moving. The person can get what's called atrophy, which is that part of the body actually shrinks and withers away. Not just to the degree that would happen to someone else if they did zero exercise. It's much more. Because the connection to the brain by means of the nerves, the innervation, the degree to which it's connected with the nerves, keeps it alive. It's a life force and keeps it fully alive. And as soon as that's cut off, it withers away. It doesn't cease to be alive completely, but it ceases to be, let's say, fully alive. So we have these three things. The brain is the head, is the source of life for the body. It controls everything that happens in the body. Those two primary motor cortices control all the voluntary movements. And there are other parts of the brain that control all the other things that happen in the body that are not voluntary movements. Your digestive system, your breathing, your hormones, etc., etc. And every single part of the body exists or is represented in super concentrated form inside of the brain. So the Mittler Rebbe explains the same thing is true on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the year. What's year? Year is time. Now, we don't necessarily think of time accurately, naturally, but time is a creation. Hashem created time. Relative to us, time is this big thing that just is, but that's because Hashem created time and then created us inside of time. But time is a creation, and every moment in time is its own separate piece of time, its own separate creation. On Rosh Hashanah, you have the entirety of the time of the coming year. Hashem sort of dumps this general collective unit of time that includes within it every moment of time in the coming year. Just as the brain includes, in the brain it's a mashal, the brain includes representation of every single part of the body. Rosh Hashanah, the time of Rosh Hashanah, includes within it every moment in time in the coming year. Rosh Hashanah is the source of life of the coming year. And Rosh Hashanah controls, but Rosh Hashanah yekosevo. And Rosh Hashanah Hashem decides what's going to happen. Rosh Hashanah controls. So those three things, it's a source of life of the whole year. It controls the whole year. And every moment of time of the coming year exists inside of Rosh Hashanah. The result of all of that is that Rosh Hashanah is a very good investment. Putting in effort to do Rosh Hashanah right is worth it because this is the brain of the whole year ahead. Every moment in time in the coming year exists inside these. In Rosh Hashanah, generally, it's 48 hours, 49 hours. The Rebbe says that, the Rebbe Rashab says the Rebbe says it's actually Rosh Hashanah l'Chassidus. Yud Tes Kislev is Rosh Hashanah l'Chassidus, which means that Yud Tes Kislev, relative to the rest of the year in the context of Chassidus, of Limud HaChassidus and Darkei HaChassidus, has the same function that Rosh Hashanah has for the rest of the year in the context of everything else. So Yud Tes Kislev, the 25 hours of Yud Tes Kislev, are the source every moment of the coming year until next Yud Tes Kislev in the context of Chassidus exists inside Yud Tes Kislev. Its chayas comes from Yud Tes Kislev and it's controlled by Yud Tes Kislev. So taking Yud Tes Kislev seriously is a very, very good idea if you're interested in having a year that's good in the context of Chassidus. So what is Chassidus? And specifically the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus. And why is it that the Alter Rebbe the Alter Rebbe faced a lot of opposition, forget the Misnagdim, from other Chassidim, from his colleagues, other Talmidei HaMagid, some of whom were very big tzaddikim, were very, very strongly opposed to the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe actually said that, the Alter Rebbe was in prison because of a Gzeira Milamayla. The Alter Rebbe attributed a very large part of that Gzeira Milamayla to the attacks that he received from his colleagues, other Talmidei HaMagid. So the criticism of other Talmidei HaMagid was in a very large part responsible for the Gzeira, which ended up with the Alter Rebbe being in prison. So they had valid concerns. We're talking about, let's say, Chassidish Rebbes, Talmidei HaMagid, who had their own followings of Chassidim. And they had such a strong and obviously valid, if the criticism of the Alter Rebbe wasn't valid, there wouldn't have been a Gzeira. So their criticism of the Alter Rebbe was obviously valid. So what was the criticism? And why was the approach of the Alter Rebbe even more valid in the face of that criticism, which is why the Gzeira ended and he came out of prison? So there was a similar Gzeira at the level of the Maggid himself, which was that the Maggid taught Chassidus, same as the Baal Shem Tov, taught Chassidus, publicized it, Pnimius HaTorah, and this was something that was very novel. Pnimius HaTorah was always there. The Baal Shem Tov didn't make it up, but the Baal Shem Tov was megale, it revealed it. Until then, there were very, very, very limited selection of people that interacted with, that learnt Pnimius HaTorah. The Baal Shem Tov took it and revealed it. Then the Alter Rebbe wanted to take it to a whole new level of revealing, not just to teach it to special students who were very high levels, who were tzaddikim. The Alter Rebbe made a point of breaking Chassidus down. You read Sfarim of the Baal Shem Tov, of other Chassidish Rebbes, 2 lines, 3 lines, a paragraph. They're very short, they're little bites, and they can be very inspiring, and sometimes you can almost feel the elokus shining from them. They're real, but you can't form a perspective about life and the world in a detailed, practical way based off these. They're little bites. The Alter Rebbe, so they said you're taking the holiest, the Pnimius HaTorah, and just making it accessible. First of all, you're making it accessible to everybody. Some of those people may not be worthy of it necessarily. Second of all, once you put something in print, you lose control. It's printed. You can't control where the copies end up. And there was a piece of paper with the teachings of the Maggid that ended up on the floor, and Reb Pinchas Koritzer got really mad at the Alter Rebbe, which is why the Alter Rebbe gave this mashal of the prince who was sick and was going to die, and they had to take the jewel, the center jewel from the king's crown, and grind it up and make it into a drink to give it to the son because he was in a coma and he couldn't even eat the stone. So they had to feed it to him, and most of it's going to spill. I assume everyone's familiar with the mashal. I hope. Because we don't really have time to sort of do it very much at length. But there are actually several stages. The person who came up with this cure for the prince's illness said there's this one stone, has minerals in it. If he eats a little piece of the stone, he'll absorb the minerals, he'll get better. So that was the plan. The king tries to find out if we have access to this stone. Good news and bad news. Good news is we have a stone. It's in the palace. It's readily accessible. Bad news is it's the centerpiece of the crown. The king says, what do you mean bad news? You think I care about my crown? The king's son is on his deathbed. He's on the brink of death. You think the king cares about his crown? He says, go take it and take a piece and feed it to him. Bad news comes back. Now the prince is in a coma. He can't even eat it anymore. So now what you have to do, so now they're like stuck, what are we going to do? So then the guy who came up with the whole cure in the first place says, well, you could just grind it into a powder and mix it with a liquid and then try to pour it in his mouth. And if a few drops manage to make their way down to his throat, among all the rest that's going to spill down on his shirt and everywhere else because he's in a coma, that should be enough to do it. So there's a big cost to this cure. The cost of this cure is basically destroying the crown. And the crown, today it's like, so what do you do? Crown. But a crown was traditionally the representation of the glory of the king and the kingdom. It was a big deal. To destroy the crown effectively by taking out that centerpiece jewel destroyed the representation of the glory of the king and the kingdom. It was a big deal. But in the face of the impending death of the king's son, you think he cares? Doesn't care in the slightest. You have to grind that thing up, grind it up. Most of it's going to get spilled on the floor. Let it get spilled on the floor as long as you can get one drop into his mouth to save his life. And this is a mashal that Alter Rebbe gave to justify and saying, yes, your concerns are valid. It is a problem that as a result of teaching Chassidus, it's going to land up in some wrong places. These papers are going to end up on the floor, etc. True. Valid concern. The glory of the crown will be destroyed. But if that's the price you have to pay to save the life of the king's son, you think the king would hesitate for an instant? Of course not. So Yidden were in a matzav that they really needed the pekuach nefesh. It was pekuach nefesh. They needed the revival, the tchias hamesim that Chassidus was able to offer. And if that came at a steep cost, well, bad luck. There's no choice. It's pekuach nefesh. You got to do it. So that was the mashal that the Alter Rebbe gave. Now, what was different practically in the way the Alter Rebbe taught it, not just whom he taught it to, but how he taught it, the Alter Rebbe took it and breaks it down Chabad. Why? You have two names, Chassidus, Lubavitch, and Chabad. Lubavitch is where we come from. Every Chassidus, you go to Borough Park, every block has 3 shuls, a different name, and generally the name is the town or city in Europe, where that group of Chassidim came from. So that's Lubavitch. That's the city in where for many generations the Rabbeim were focused at and lived and taught from primarily and operated from. But there's another name, Chabad, because it's not just where we come from. There is a specific philosophical approach. Chachma bin Adas, using your mind. What does it mean, using your mind? If you look at the behavior of Lubavitcher Chassidim versus the behavior of other Chassidim, you would hardly say that Lubavitcher Chassidim come across as being particularly academic. Right? Dancing on top of mitzvah tanks and stopping random people on the street, asking them if they're Jewish and asking them to tie some dead cow around their arm. It's not academic. Behaviorally, Lubavitchers don't behave like academics.
Right.
But Lubavitchers can be kind of out there behaviorally relative to the rest of the, let's say, Haredi world, right? So why is it called Chabad? It's called Chabad not because the emphasis, the end is Chabad. Chabad is a means to an end. Now, I can tell you as a parent, and you may or may not appreciate this from the other end, and Be'ezus Hashem, you'll all appreciate this in time. One of the biggest, perhaps the biggest challenge that a parent will face, the deepest challenge, is when a child's born, and naturally, you can imagine, naturally you think your child's going to think like you, and your child's going to have the same interests as you, and see things the same way you do, and feel about things the same way you do. And then you start to learn, actually, no. My child isn't interested in the same things as me. They don't understand things the same way that I do. They don't think the same way that I do. They don't see the world the same way as I do. And they feel differently about things than I do. And, a lot of people will go through a bit of an existential crisis when that hit kicks in. And then with time, they can start to realize and appreciate, yeah, my job as a parent isn't to have clones. It's to raise individuals that the Eibishter gave to me, and my children are not me. And each of them is different. And once a parent can let go of that and say, yes, my children are not me, they're separate to me and they're different to me, and my job is to empower each of them as best I can to become the best that they can become as someone who's different to me, not give them the things that are good for me, give them the things that are good for them, each for themselves, which sounds simple. It's not a simple thing to manage at all. It's an extremely difficult thing to manage. But the first step is the awareness of the fact that my children aren't me. They're their own individuals and different to each other. The Alter Rebbe saw it that way. Every single Yid has their own seichel, their own nefesh, is their own individual, and deserves to have their own personal experience with the Eibishter. It's not like I'm a tzaddik and I'm going to do my thing and everyone can just tag along. The Alter Rebbe was, in the mashal, that mature parent that says every single one deserves to have their own relationship because they're not me, they're their own individual. So the Alter Rebbe gave us Chassidus that's broken down in a way that we can all learn it ourselves, understand it ourselves, and the seichel is the key to the midos. That's why it's Chabad. Not because it's about the seichel, it's primarily about the midos. But to develop your midos, the way to do that effectively and in a way that's real is using your seichel. Empower yourself with seichel, you will be able to develop your midos. And the Alter Rebbe wanted each of us to have the opportunity to do that for ourselves as an individual, to learn Chassidus ourselves, understand about the Eibishter ourselves, develop our midos ourselves, because our seichel's all different and our midos are all different. And the Alter Rebbe wanted us to each maximize our capacity and experience and fulfillment as an individual. And that's why the Alter Rebbe made a point in the face of the opposition and criticism from all his colleagues and in the face of going to prison and ... Nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe said it's worth it and necessary to teach Chassidus in this way, in a way of Chabad, that people can understand the way things work academically. With that understanding, they can then develop emotionally and have their own individual personal emotions, their own Avas Hashem, not just my Avas Hashem, and their own Year of Chassidus, not just mine. Everyone should be able to have their own individual experience. And that is what Chabad Chassidus is about. And Yud Tes Kislev is a good time really to take seriously and to say, you know what, maybe I can't be perfect every day, or definitely we can't be perfect every day, but I'm going to really put in some extra effort to really, really make my Yud Tes Kislev as real and proper as it can be, and to do Limud Chassidus and Darkei Chassidus as best I can, particularly, just in terms of setting goals. It's very hard to set a massive goal. It's much easier and practical to set yourself a goal for 25 hours. What's going to happen in 2 days, I don't care. It doesn't matter right now. Right now, what matters is the next 25 hours. That's the goal I can set myself realistically. For the 25 hours of Yud Tes Kislev, it's the Rosh, the head of the year, and everything in the context of Chassidus exists inside of Yud Tes Kislev, comes from there and is controlled by that. I'm going to invest in doing Yud Tes Kislev as properly as I can, so that I can have as healthy and fulfilling and rewarding, frankly, year ahead in the context of Darkei Chassidus. Shana Tova v'limud Chassidus u'v'darkei Chassidus tikaseva v'seichasemo.